In this video, I'm going to show you how I took my UCAT score from this to this. Hi and welcome back to the channel. My name's Dr. Ashley Hilton, and in this video I'm going to show you what I changed when I did my UCAT to take my score from quite a low one to significantly increase it. And it's the same method that I teach my students and improve their scores year in, year out. Because when I first sat the UCAT, I thought that I was doing everything as I should by the book, but I realized now that I had absolutely no clue. I had no strategy or plan as to how I was going to tackle the exam, and my scores just completely reflected that. And of course the whole thing was like really stressful at the time because it's the UCAT exam and you have to do well, and if you don't get into medical school, and you know, that's your future, and that was really stressful to think that that might not happen. So I knew that I had to do something and change something drastically, otherwise I wouldn't get the score and wouldn't meet the grade and get into medical school. So at that point, that was when I decided to take a step back and analyze the strategy of actually how I was tackling this exam. I realized that I was going about it all wrong and actually devised a new strategy, which is the one I'm going to teach you now. And then after I made these changes, that is when my score started drastically improving. And safe it to say, I got into medicine, and then if you know anything about me, I'm also a dentist, so I got into dental school at King's College after that. And it's the same strategy that I now teach to my students, who all perform well and improve their scores massively under my guidance. So in this video, we're going to be looking at a few things. Firstly, the 3 elements that you need to time your exam, my number 1 tip for scoring highly on each section, my philosophy for the UCAT, how to prepare, and then finally, the secret sauce. So the first thing I would say is massively important to do is actually set a UCAT goal. My mistake was that I just sat down and did practice questions and didn't really have an endpoint in mind. Now, when you set your UCAT goals, you're essentially going to have one of 2 things. You're either going to have a specific university in mind, and that means that you need typically a threshold score to go on from previous years. So for example, you might say, I want to get into King's College London, and there they need an average of 735 and a band 1 in the SJT. Or you could just say, I'm going to try and get the highest UCAT score I can get, and then I'm going to use that to guide me as to what medical schools I can apply to. Now, instead of just saying the highest score I can get, I think it's better to actually put a number on it. Then you can set it as something that's aspirational yet achievable, and you can work towards it. Now, I'm going to show you later in the video how you can work towards that and continually review that score, and maybe if you feel like you're achieving it and you're actually on course to get it, you could maybe even review that score continually and set the bar higher as you go. The next thing we need to consider is the timing of when you should sit your exam. Now, I always say that this should consider 3 things. Number 1 is that it should minimally encroach on some of the big commitments from your life. So that means exams, maybe if you've got any major holidays in the summer or major events such as weddings, but particularly with your exams, you want to do it at a time where it will not impact the score that you get. Because as important as the UCAT is, it's really important that you get, say, your A-levels or whatever grading system that you're doing, because that is just as important for you to make the mark to get into medical school. So when you've picked a window where you won't encroach on those commitments, then you need to also, the second factor, which is make some time to actually give you some runway to prepare for the exam. Now, this is usually around 2 to 3 months for most people. And the third and final element is that you have to sit it early enough so that you can rethink and have a plan B if the UCAT score doesn't go to plan, which essentially means that you do it early enough so that if you decide that you're going to have to go for the BMAT unis and sit the BMAT last minute, you've at least given yourself a couple of months to do the November sitting and give yourself time to revise for that. So this means that you have to be absolutely on it as soon as the exam dates come out and those places are released, because those slots get taken up really, really fast. Okay, so now let's look at the individual sections of the UCAT and the one thing that I focused on most to improve my score. Firstly, I recommend that you have a look at one of the recent videos I released about planning your UCAT strategy, because here we have a look at the scores per section, average scores, and things that you should aim for, and the difficulties that people have with the individual sections. And furthermore, I'm actually bringing out a brand new course that's coming out in the next few weeks that's going to tell you exactly how to optimize your performance for each individual section and give you more than just the quick tips that I'm giving you here. So I'm going to quickly tell you my number 1 point for each section, but I'll caveat it here with the overarching theme, and that is that the exam is so time pressured, and all of these bits of advice aim to give you the most accurate but time efficient method of approaching each section and answering the questions correctly and quickly. Because by far the hardest part of the UCAT exam is doing everything under the intense time pressure. So the first is the verbal reasoning section, and this is by far the trickiest and the lowest scoring one across the board. Now, the best way to do these quickly is to practice and perfect the technique called the targeted read. And I'll very quickly touch on it here. In essence, what you do is when you get a passage, you ignore it, go straight to the question, work out the essence of what the question is asking, scan the passage then. Only then do you scan the passage and look for mention of that theme. It could be in one place, two places, or sometimes even three. Once you've found it, you read the sentence before, of, and after, and then you use that information to answer the question. Once I nailed this technique, my verbal reasoning performance improved massively. It's something that you have to trust and put your faith in, and when you're under pressure, you have to make sure that you stick true to it. But once you get it down and get comfortable doing it against the timer, this is an absolute game changer for your performance, the speed, accuracy, and everything that you need to do well in that exam. So for the abstract reasoning, my main tip is that you want a resource that's going to take you through all the possible questions so that you're prepared for the different question types and you've seen everything before you go into the exam, and then you're familiar with the techniques that they give you on how to tackle them. And the second thing with that is if you get a good resource, it will usually give you a system and a framework for how to tackle them systematically and go through those abstract type shapes and questions that you'll see. So mine is an acronym called Spartan IBS, which you can have a look at some of my previous UCAT videos here on YouTube, and you'll see the exact system that I use to help you thoroughly go through all of the possibilities when you're talking about abstract questions, and it goes through them systematically and accurately to make sure that you don't miss anything. And again, if you want a thorough resource, I have a UCAT course coming out in a few weeks that are going to tell you all the different question types that could possibly come up and a technique for how to tackle each one. For quantitative reasoning, my biggest tip is practice your mental maths. Now, you have a calculator in the UCAT exam, but it's a computer one. You have to go onto a different screen to access it, and it's incredibly slow because you have to use your mouse to click on the individual numbers. Now, that makes the whole thing incredibly slow. So the quicker you are and the better you are with your mental arithmetic, the more you can practice it to make sure that it's sharp on the tip of your fingers and you have confidence in it, the better you will perform, because that will make you go quicker and act more confidently in your calculations. With decision making, there are a couple of things that I would say are the most important. The thing that helped me the most was this was where I used the whiteboard and pen the most to make logical connections between things. And the second thing was, with a bit of practice, you start to learn when it is necessary to make calculations and where some things are not included in the question and you actually can just ignore them altogether. And as soon as I had this realization, that is when I realized that I was wasting a lot of time on unnecessary calculations, saved me a lot of time, made me more efficient, let me spend more time on the important stuff and increase my accuracy and increase my score. And for SJT, I would say that the biggest clue is in the wording. Usually you get asked to rank things by, say, most appropriate, and the clue will usually be in the way that it's worded. So with a bit of practice, you get good at recognizing these types of words, knowing what they're kind of inferring without saying it directly, and that will help you know where to rank them in the order that you get asked to put them in. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my philosophy that I developed for how I prepared. Now, I talk about this in depth in my Your UCAT Strategy video, which I released a couple of weeks ago, but the main thing that I want you to think of is that the UCAT is actually a performance, and it's like sprint training. When you sit the UCAT, the timing of it, the intensity of it, it's just a complete mental bombardment. You have 2 hours and loads of different data points are thrown at you. You have different types of questions, sentences, numbers, loads of stuff thrown at you. And at the end, you just come out of it and you feel like your head is swimming from the intense mental concentration and mental strain that you've had from such an intense exam. And because of that, I want you to consider it like sprint training. Because when you think about it, a sprinter, when they train, they're not there for 5 hours sprinting constantly until they collapse. A sprinter will do incredibly short bursts of very intense exercise and then take really, really long rests. And essentially, the UCAT is just like a sprint. So what I'm going to do in the next section is when I show you how to prepare is just bear that philosophy in mind. So the first stage of preparing is familiarizing yourself with the types of questions that you get, the techniques, and just knowing exactly how to handle each of the types of questions that come up. And that you can do whenever you want, and you can consider that like your baseline foundational learning that you can do before you start doing the questions. But once you have that foundational knowledge, it is then time to start doing practice papers and simulating the test as much as possible. Remember that the UCAT is more like a performance, and I want you to train yourself to perform on game day. So as soon as possible, I want you to start doing whatever you can to mimic the test situation. And that includes doing practice questions under the time constraints. And I would say it's really important to do a mock paper early on to serve as a calibration tool to let you know where you're at. So then you can see where the goal is, where you are now, and work out how you're going to close that gap to get where you want to be. And the final thing I want to give you is my secret sauce for scoring well in the UCAT. And simply, my secret sauce is a 6-step strategy to help you prepare for this exam. So step 1, as I've said, is first lay down the foundation knowledge. Use a good resource that goes through every possible type of question and gives you a technique so you can familiarize yourself with them and know exactly how you're going to tackle each one. Like I say, there are many good resources out there, and I myself have a UCAT course coming out in the next few weeks, which is comprehensive and gives you everything, covers all the question types and exactly how to go about them. Second is set a goal for your UCAT, whether it's a specific score for a university or a constantly moving bar of getting the highest that you can possibly get. Number 3 is I want you to do a mock test as soon as you can to calibrate your score and give you a real picture of where you are and how far you've got to go. Number 4 is that I then want you to start doing practice tests against the timer as soon as possible. And my favorite podcaster, Tim Ferriss, has a lot of great techniques for this. One of the things that he says is just do as much as you can to simulate how you're going to be, the physiology you're going to be in for the exam. So he says do practice at the same time as day as you're going to sit the exam. You can even simulate that heart racing, chest pounding feeling by doing a little bit of intense exercise just before you practice, or even doing the exam in distracting scenarios, because even though it's in exam conditions, the test center always has that horrible mouth breather next to you going being like Darth Vader and putting you off. So even exam conditions are not as optimal as you'd like them to be. Number 5 is definitely do your practice questions on a computer. I'm not saying that the books aren't good, a lot of them are really great, but at the end of the day, it's a performance and you're gonna have to do it on a computer against the timer. So practice doing it on a computer against the timer. And my final tip is don't overdo it. UCAT burnout is a real thing, and people do get to a point where they kind of overdo it and they reach the point of diminishing returns where their score actually starts getting worse. So I would say you don't need any more than 3 months to prepare. And remember, sessions don't need to be too long. So maximum 2 hours, which is the length of the exam, and then take long rests. You can maybe do another session later in the day, maximum really 3 sessions with long breaks in between. So just beware of that point of diminishing returns, and also do what you can to maintain the sustainability of your study. So when your score starts consistently getting worse, that's probably an indicator that you've overdone it and it's time to take a break. So to summarize, the things that actually helped me improve my UCAT score massively were first that I started treating it a bit like sprint training. The second was that I did as much as I could to mimic the test as much as possible. I also made sure that I used a comprehensive resource that came out with all the question types and ways to tackle them. And as I say, I'm going to release a UCAT course soon that will help you do all of that. And don't worry, it will be released with plenty of time for you to prepare for your UCAT exam day. And in the same vein, I would recommend a question bank that replicates the test as much as possible. The one that I recommend to all my students is Medify, and I've got a discount link to what I think is the best online question bank below. So thanks for watching the video. As always, I love hearing from you. So if you have any questions or any words of encouragement, just pop them in the comments below and I love to hear them. And if you like. And the video factory is in full swing right now as we're preparing for UCAT. So if you want me to tell you as soon as I've released a video, just hit the notification bell here, and the very instant that a video comes out, you will be notified. And thanks once again for watching, and just have the most wonderful day.